I will be honest, sometimes I have a difficult time explaining in words what I've done with images, but I will certainly do my best, and I'm looking at the image right now because I have them on my computer. And I remember there's an interesting and mundane story to this picture as well. This is, and it's sort of unrelated to your question, but it's an interesting point nonetheless. This is one of the few images that I did, that I created on what was essentially an old photograph. The majority of the found paper that I used, what I had always been drawn to when I had begun collecting and assembling all of that found paper, which went on for years before I began this project, was primarily visual representations of information more than specific imagery. So I was collecting diagrams and repair guides, charts, maps, things like that, because this idea of taking information, particularly scientific information, mechanical information, electrical information, and representing it in visual form where it takes on a kind of beauty. I was always fascinated by that paradox, because really there's nothing very beautiful about preparing a television. But then when you look at some of these circuitry patterns and repair guides, there is an eerie sort of complexity and beauty to that. So, that originally drew me to those pages. And, that played a big part in why I chose to use the found paper for this project anyway. But this piece here, for whatever reason, is one of the few found photographs. Even though it's a page from a book, I mean, it's not the original photo, but it's a photo of I wish I could remember specifically what it is, but I can't. So I used that paper to create this illustration, and I remember the publishers wanted to use this as the cover image, and they had changed the title of the book anyway. I had wanted it to be called, I think what the title of my blog was, which was Every Page of Moby-Dick, or one drawing for every page of Moby-Dick, or something like that. And they changed the title, and they were right to change the title because they understand the vagaries of the book marketplace far, far better than I do. So they changed it to Moby-Dick in Pictures. But then they initially had this piece on the cover, and I was a little upset because since this is one of the few that's on an actual photograph, I was very concerned that those who might spend, a fairly significant amount of money for the book would be misled into believing that it was a collection of altered photographs, which it, most definitely is not. So we went back and forth, and in the end I was very happy with what they chose, but, this piece will always sadly sort of stick in my mind more for that argument with the publishers and what the original intent was. I remember when working on this piece, I was still, again, struggling. I feel like I still struggle now with that idea of the whiteness of the whale, what it represents. I think since so much of these images, so many of these illustrations draw on really my childhood in so many ways. I mean, I feel like my childhood lasted until I was 39. And then my adulthood began, suddenly at the age of 40. There was no intermediary period. So when you're a child, you're used to thinking of things in very simple, concrete ways. Black is the color of sadness. Black is the color of fear. Black is the color of evil. Black is the color of terror. Black is where the monsters live, and so on. And you think of whiteness as the opposite. And it's a drastically oversimplified way of representing that, but that's one of the reasons why I continue to struggle with this idea. And I remember in the Poe story, the narrative of, I think, A. Gordon Pym? Can't remember the specific title. And there's the idea of whiteness there as well. They're sailing closer and closer to this strange place down at the bottom of the world, and they find these white people. Literally, they're white, and it evinces in all of the viewers, this kind of existential terror. So this idea began to creep into my mind through a lot of different readings, and it was something that I still had a very difficult time reconciling with that oversimplified childhood way of looking at the colors black and white. But then you begin to think of the whiteness as a sort of nothingness, as a void, as an all-encompassing. There are so many different ways of looking at it. So see, this page suggested itself to me perfectly because the first thing that I noticed spite of those lines, is the whiteness of the page. It's this vast expanse of whiteness that just really seemed to be calling out to me in a visual sense. You know, what better way to explore the idea of whiteness than with a page that's predominantly made up of negative space? So that was really my starting point. And then I really liked the way that there were a few of those shapes drifting, you know, through that space, and like you said, connected to various things on the ground, and even with the overlapping of those tethers, connected to one another in visual ways. And it was, of course, very deliberate. In a sense, so many of these illustrations are self-portraits, which I guess may be true of all artists. But you see that central shape, that vast shape in the middle there that I put in. That's my pencil work. It bisects the page. It dominates the page. It looms over everything below it. It's oppressive. It's terrifying. And then underneath it, there's that tiny human figure pushing against it. You know, that tiny point of contact. But it's that initial spark, that initial push to not only try to know it and to understand it, but to push back against it. And that, of course, is probably very obviously me, and me still struggling to come to terms as both an artist and a reader with what the whiteness of the whale means, what was Melville trying to share with us. It's one of the chapters that I still struggle with the most as a reader, and this entire image is a distillation of that the challenge that chapter continues to represent to me. See, you can almost see that almost gentle kind of force, that slight indentation showing that this is an intentional contact. This is maybe not a violation of sorts, but yes, there's a push and there's a resistance. There's a struggle there. There's a force meeting an immovable object. It's very important too. This sort of goes along with what you're saying. It was very important too that this idea, this entity, this thing that was resisting me, be seen above me as well. So there are many images. I think if you have the book there's one, page 362, I remember. I'll always remember that title. There are so many images in which there is that play of the arrangement on the page in this idea of what is above and what is below and how they affect one another, this feeling of gravity.